One crash can change everything, but a car crash just isn't about the damage caused. You have to understand your rights and the process that follows. Hey, I'm personal injury attorney Loyd Bourgeois, and I work to get you the financial justice you deserve after a crash. Today, I want to talk to you about some common causes of car crashes in Louisiana, a few types of crashes you may see, and some common issues affecting all claims or lawsuits. Some common causes of car crashes include things like distracted driving, speeding or reckless driving, driving under the influence, or just plain inattentiveness. When I say distracted driving, think texting while driving. According to the NHTSA, texting takes a person's eyes off the road for an average of 5 seconds, and that's for each text. This increases crash risk by 23 times compared to a non-distracted driver, according to a study done by Virginia Tech. But distracted driving can also mean talking on the phone. Talking on the phone while driving also significantly increases your crash risk. According to AAA, even hands-free devices create cognitive distractions that result in an increased risk of crashing. There are other in-car distractions as well, things like adjusting the radio, eating, or using a GPS to find your next location can split your attention span and increase the risk of crashes. Another cause of crashes, speeding and reckless driving. These heavy machines that we have at our hands can become very hard to control when speeding or being handled in a reckless manner. Common sense tells us higher speeds are going to impact severity and often injury. Reckless behaviors like tailgating also heighten crash risk. Driving under the influence continues to be a big cause of crashes. Alcohol and drug usage drastically reduce reaction times, leading to increased rates of crashes for those choosing to drive while intoxicated. While those driving under the influence face criminal penalties, in Louisiana, if a crash is caused by someone driving under the influence, they can also be responsible for punitive damages. And finally, just plain inattentiveness causes plenty of crashes. Being lost in thought and thinking the car in front of you proceeded when it didn't, and then you go and hit it, or just driving and swerving into another lane, resulting in a sideswipe. Again, this inattentiveness creates crashes. Sometimes we see folks taking off from an intersection without fully making sure the roadway is clear. Again, inattentiveness can cause crashes. Next, let's move to some common types of crashes. There are a number of different types of car crashes that we see, and each has its own challenges, but they often have these common fact patterns and often similar injuries result. A very common type we see is a rear-end collision. Now, these are often caused by tailgating, sudden braking, traffic, people not paying attention at red lights. These often result in injuries like whiplash, but they can also cause other neck, shoulder, or back injuries. We see sometimes some leg injuries, leg and foot injuries from this as well, when you hit from behind and you instinctually brace with your feet. So we'll see some injuries there. Now, the severity of the injuries will really depend on the speed of the vehicles involved in these crashes. Usually liability is clear. The following driver is at fault because they should be focused on the roadway ahead of them. They should be paying attention to what's going on ahead of them. That's not always the case. Another type of collision would be a head-on collision. These types of collisions are often caused by distracted or impaired driving, reckless driving, sometimes inattentiveness, tiredness often results in a head-on collision, falling asleep at the wheel. Many times, unfortunately, these crashes are very severe and many times fatal. These head-on collision cases can be very complex depending on how many parties are involved, and they may require some extensive investigation to figure out exactly what happened. Another common type of collision would be what we call a T-bone collision. These are common at intersections. They often result from a failure to yield, or running a red light, somebody running a stop sign. The damages and the injuries will really depend on speed in some of these cases, but just because it's a low impact, low speed crash doesn't mean injuries will not occur. Some common injuries we see here are shoulder injuries, herniated disc in the neck and the back. Sometimes you see some fractures as well, depending on the angle of the impact and where people's body was in the car. In these cases, liability often is disputed. They become sometimes these he said, she said types of cases. It's very helpful if you have witnesses or video, if you take some pictures at the scene, showing the position of the vehicles following the crash, and also being truthful with the investigating officer. Many times, folks may say one thing to you, and then when the investigating officer gets there, the story changes. And so these investigations can be complex, and they need to be investigated thoroughly in order to pin down liability many times. Something we've seen quite a few of around here in the past few years, these multi-vehicle pileups. We see these often when you have a lot of poor weather, fog, especially rain, and when there's a lot of traffic on the interstate, so during rush hour. They can also be caused by other factors, reckless driving, speeding, tailgating. Those things can cause chain reactions that ultimately involve multiple vehicles. The impacts, the property damage, as well as the actual injuries will depend on a variety of factors. I mean, some folks may walk away unscathed and others may lose their life, unfortunately. These are very complicated in many cases, and they need thorough and skilled investigation. We also often see some single vehicle crashes. Now, many times these are caused by just reckless driving, folks driving under the influence of some type of drugs or alcohol. They can also be caused by people being fatigued, tired. But they can also be caused by other external factors, the roadway, hazards on the roadway, obstacles on the roadway. Again, the driver is usually going to be at fault in single vehicle crashes, but there may be claims the roadway is not designed properly, if it's causing some issues, if other parties are creating hazards or obstacles, or if the vehicle itself had some kind of defect. These cases are going to require some very detailed investigation if third-party liability is suspected. We have also heard of and see in our office from time to time rollover crashes. Now, these occur many times when you're taking a turn at a high speed and you're in a bigger vehicle. The vehicle weight gets distributed more to the top, and just physics and forces causes it to overturn. Sometimes with speeding, with an intersection collision and somebody is blowing through a red light at high speed, can cause a rollover instance, and also blown tires. Unfortunately, in many of these cases, the injuries and damages we see are very catastrophic. Unfortunately, in these cases, liability is sometimes very complicated because they may involve a number of product defect investigations to determine who is ultimately at fault or bears some responsibility for this rollover. Now, let's talk about some issues to expect regardless of the cause or type of crash. The big one is just some insurance issues. Liability coverage for the parties involved in the crash are going to vary based on what each person purchased, how many people are involved, what you purchased. Usually, the amount available to pay for the damages is many times not dependent on your actual injuries. In Louisiana, for example, the minimum coverage required by the state is only $15,000 for bodily injury damages, $25,000 for property damages. But that $15,000 is for one person. If it's you getting in a crash with one other person, many times $15,000 will be all that's available. Again, it's going to depend on what their policy is. But if there's multiple people in your car, or it's a multi-car crash, and the person has a minimum policy, it's only $30,000 for everyone that may be involved in the crash. And so that can impact and influence exactly how a case gets resolved. And here's another thing to consider. A high percentage of folks in Louisiana don't even have liability insurance. So you get in a crash with someone and they don't have liability insurance, and there's no way to recover in many instances if that's the case. One way you can protect yourself is by purchasing your own underinsured motorist coverage, which you should speak to your own agent about. Another common issue that we're going to run into in any type of case or claim is going to be making sure we have the right evidence. And this evidence can range from investigation and crash reports to photographs you've taken, investigating officers taken, witness statements. Even if the witnesses are just you and the other driver, those statements can be important. Those pictures will be important. The investigation done by a responding officer will be important. Evidence also includes your medical documentation. For your injuries, your medical documentation and support is going to be highly important to determining ultimately how your case is evaluated and resolved. So making sure you have the right evidence is very, very important to protecting your rights. And finally, another issue that kind of transcends the cause and types of crashes is going to be just these legal challenges that come up. So for example, in these multi-party claims where it's caused by the fog, it may be third parties could be involved, and there's multiple people. We're talking delayed resolutions. It can take a while to figure it all out. There can be many investigations that are occurring simultaneously that will just lengthen the process of things. Another complication could be, for yourself, if you're injured, if you have any pre-existing conditions or conditions that are similar to but not exactly like the injury you suffered in this crash. Those things can complicate your injury claim. Now, while these challenges can be overcome with strong representation, it's important for you to recognize that they exist and know when to seek representation if they do exist. Finally, I just want to mention a few tips for you to kind of help protect yourself immediately after a crash. One, hopefully just make sure you're safe, you're out of harm's way, you're on a big highway, try to get off of the roadway if it's possible, and call 911. No matter where the crash happens at, call 911. We want to have some kind of record. You want to have some kind of record showing that this occurred. And the best way to do that is call 911. As I said earlier, in some types of cases, stories change. So the quicker you can call 911, get the investigating authorities out there to start getting stories, talking to witnesses, can really lock in exactly what happened. If you're able to, gather as much evidence as you can. Take pictures, wide shots, zoom shots, talk to witnesses if possible, get their contact information, name and phone number, very important. If you're hurt in any way, if you feel a little off following a crash or collision, seek some medical attention. Even minor injuries are going to require you to have some documentation for your claim. And these minor injuries sometimes can turn into bigger things later. We just don't know early on. But if you wait until it turns into something bigger, there can be, and there often will be, questions about what caused that injury if you don't have some documentation along the way of you complaining about what happened. Finally, you need to consult an experienced attorney who knows what's needed to prove your case and who can negotiate with the insurance companies to protect your interest, and ultimately who's going to sue if your interests are not protected. Look, if you've been in a crash, don't wait. Protect your rights by consulting with an experienced Louisiana car crash attorney who will fight to get you the financial justice you deserve. If you found this video helpful, hit subscribe for more legal tips and strategies, and don't forget to click that bell button for more updates. For more information on this topic, or if you need to speak with my team about your crash, don't hesitate to reach out to us at ljblegal.com. While there, you can schedule your free consultation and let us help you get the justice you deserve. I'll see you in the next video.